The ink had not yet dried when the world went silent. Brindis Aldwyn stood frozen in the antechamber of the Hall of Iron Treaties, the quill still trembling between her fingers, and watched as every lantern flame along the marble walls bowed inward at once, bowed toward her, as if something ancient had inhaled, and the fire itself had answered. She had only meant to fetch the inkpot. 3 weeks. 3 weeks she had served as the lowest scribe in the chancery of Veilmore, copying treaties she did not understand for lords she was not permitted to look at. 3 weeks of bowed head and silent feet, and bread eaten alone at the back of the kitchens. Her father's last coin had bought her this position, and his last breath had bought her a warning. Keep your name off any parchment in that hall, daughter, no matter what. She had not understood why. She had not asked. The fever had taken him before she could. Now she understood. The Hall of Iron Treaties was the oldest chamber in the kingdom of Veilmore, older than the throne itself, older than the line of wolves who had ruled from it for 900 winters. Its walls were black basalt veined with silver. Its floor bore the carved sigils of every binding oath ever sworn beneath its vaulted ceiling. And at its center, on a pedestal of polished obsidian, lay the document. Always capitalized, always whispered, always the same. The Alpha King's contract, the mating accord, drafted that very dawn by the High Council, listing the names of every eligible daughter of every great house in the realm. A binding written in the old tongue, sealed with the blood of the moon itself. Whichever name the Alpha King signed beside his own would be queen by sundown. Bound to him by law, by blood, by the wolf magic that ran beneath the kingdom like an underground river. Brindis had only come to fetch the inkpot the head scribe had forgotten. The chamber had been sealed for the ceremony, but the side door had been left ajar, and the pedestal had stood unguarded for the span of a single heartbeat, and she had thought, I will only look. I will only look at the names of women whose lives I will never share. She had bumped the pedestal. The inkpot had tipped. A single black drop had rolled toward the parchment, threatening to ruin the most sacred document in the kingdom. And without thinking, God's help her. Without thinking, she had snatched up the quill and tried to soak the drop before it spread. But the parchment had drunk the ink the moment the quill touched it, pulled it, drawn it, and shaped it into letters she had not meant to write. BRYNDISALDWEN. Her own name, bleeding across the parchment in a hand she did not recognize as hers, beneath the gilt-lettered name of the king, joined to it, wedded to it. The lantern flames bowed, the sigils on the floor began to glow. Brindis stumbled backward, the quill falling from her numb fingers, and her hand flew to the small leather cord at her throat. The cord that held her mother's silver ring, the only thing she had left in the world. Her mother had pressed it into her palm on the day she was lost to her and said, "This will keep you hidden, my heart. Whatever you do, do not be seen." She had been seen. Behind her, a door she had not heard open closed with the soft, terrible click of a trap being sprung. And from the far end of the Hall of Iron Treaties, where she had not realized anyone stood, where she had thought herself entirely alone, a low voice spoke. It was a voice like wolves moving through deep snow, like something that had been waiting a very long time. "Look up at me." Brindis could not breathe. The secret stitched into the lining of her cloak in her mother's hand, the secret that the silver ring at her throat existed solely to suppress, pulsed once against her collarbone like a second heartbeat. She looked up. The Alpha King of Veilmore was already looking at her. His eyes were the color of stormlight through amber glass. His shoulders filled the dark archway behind the pedestal, ceremonial silver at his throat, the great ring of his office gleaming on his hand. He had not yet signed. The quill on his side of the parchment lay untouched. He did not look at the parchment. He looked at her. And in a voice so quiet that it should not have carried the length of a hall like that, The Alpha King said, "It's done." The bells began before she could move. 9 deep, resonant peals, one for each century the Veilmore crown had stood, and Brindis knew without being told that the bells were ringing for her. Somewhere outside the palace walls, criers were already shouting. Somewhere beyond those, doves were already lifting from the towers carrying sealed parchments to every great house in the realm. A queen had been chosen, a queen no one had ever heard of, a queen who could not breathe. The doors of the Hall of Iron Treaties had been flung open. Council members poured in. Old men in white robes, lords in deep blue, the High Speaker with her staff of bone. And every single one of them stopped at the threshold when they saw what lay on the obsidian pedestal. Brindis could feel the moment they realized, the collective intake of breath, the single, stunned silence that came before the storm. "It cannot be," someone whispered. "That name was not on the list. That name does not exist." The High Speaker stepped forward, her staff striking the stone with a crack that made Brindis flinch. She was a tall woman, all sharp cheekbones and silver braids, and her eyes were the cold pale of a winter river. "Who," she said very softly, "is Brindis Aldwyn?" It was not a question. The Alpha King had not stepped forward. He had not moved at all. He stood where he had stood when she first saw him, perfectly still, watching her the way a wolf watches a deer that has not yet realized it has been seen. "My king." The High Speaker turned. Her voice took on the careful pitch of someone trying to coax a blade back into its sheath. "There has been a grievous error. The contract is sacred. We will scribe a new one. The girl will be removed, and her trespass will be addressed." "No." A single word. Almost gentle. The High Speaker's mouth opened, closed. "My king, the law of the binding is absolute. A name written in error is still a name written. Unless you refuse the seal, she will be—" "I have not refused." "My king, please. You do not know who she is. You have not spoken to her. You have not—" "I know who she is." The High Speaker turned slowly to look at him. So did every other figure in the hall. Brindis, who had not yet managed to lower her hand from her throat, felt the silver ring beneath her collar begin to grow warm, then hot, then almost too hot to bear. The Alpha King moved at last, a single step toward the pedestal. He did not look at the council. He did not look at the parchment. He looked at her. And then, with the same terrible quiet calm, he picked up his own quill, dipped it, and signed his name beside hers without ever taking his eyes from her face. Theron Veilmore, Alpha King of Veilmore, son of the Iron Throne. The sigils on the floor flared white. The lanterns guttered, then blazed. Brindis's knees nearly gave out. Something clicked into place inside her chest, a sensation she had no word for, like a key turning in a lock she had not known she had. And at the exact same moment, she saw the king's hand tighten on the pedestal until his knuckles went pale. He had felt it too. Whatever it was. He had felt it too. The High Speaker's staff struck the stone again, harder. "My king." With respect. With every respect. "We do not even know her bloodline. She is mine." The two words landed in the hall like stones dropped into deep water. Brindis felt them ripple outward, through the council, through the watching guards, through the very walls. And she felt one other thing in the same instant. Eyes. Watching her. Not the king's. Not the council's. From the high gallery above, where the noble witnesses had been seated to observe the signing, a woman in pale gold was looking down at her. Tall. Beautiful in the way a drawn sword is beautiful. Hair the color of dark wine, mouth painted red, and a smile that did not match her eyes. The Lady Serenza. Brindis did not know her name yet. She would learn it soon enough. For now, she only knew that the woman in the gallery was looking at her the way a butcher looks at livestock, and that her smile, when it widened, did not warm her face. it sharpened it. The high speaker bowed at last, stiffly, every line of her body radiating disapproval. Then, by the law of the Iron Treaty, it is done. It is done. The same words he had said. Brindis's vision swam. The hall tilted. She felt the ring at her throat burn against her skin, felt her father's last whisper rise up through the years as if he were standing right beside her. Keep your name off any parchment in that hall. And only then, far too late, did she understand what he had been trying to protect her from. Not the marriage, not the king, the seeing. Her secret had been seen. By the pedestal, by the binding, by something far older than either. And as the council began to move, as guards stepped forward to escort her to chambers she had never imagined sleeping in, Brindis caught one last glimpse of the woman in pale gold turning to whisper to the dark-cloaked man standing behind her. The man's eyes met hers across the hall for a single heartbeat. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked like he had been waiting. They gave her a chamber with no lock on the inside. Brindis noticed it the moment the women left. 3 of them, silent maids with downcast eyes, had stripped the simple wool dress from her shoulders, washed her in water scented with crushed myrrh, and pulled a gown of bone-white silk over her head before she could form the words to refuse. They had brushed her dark hair until it shone. They had set a circlet of pale moonstone against her brow. They had not spoken to her once. When they left, they bowed as if she were already crowned. And when the door closed behind them, Brindis turned the iron handle and found that it moved freely. But there was no bolt, no bar, no latch she could throw on her own side. The chamber locked from without, not from within. She stood in the center of the great room, a room larger than the entire cottage she had grown up in, with a hearth tall enough to walk into, and a bed wide enough to sleep 5. And pressed her hand against the silver ring at her throat. It had cooled at last, sometime after they led her from the hall, but the skin beneath it still felt scorched, tender, wrong. The secret was awake now. She could feel it the way one feels a wound beneath a bandage. The constant low awareness of something that had been hidden bleeding through. Her mother had told her, when she was very small, that the ring was a gift from a grandmother she had never met. Wear it always, my heart. It will keep you small. It will keep you safe. Brindis had thought it was a story, the way mothers tell stories to small children to make them sleep. She had not understood that it was an instruction. She understood now. She crossed to the high arched window and pushed the shutter open. The palace of Veilmore sprawled below her in tiers of black stone and silver moonlight, terrace upon terrace falling away toward the city, and the city falling away toward the dark forests that bordered the kingdom on every side. Bonfires were already being lit in the lower wards. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of celebration. Drums, voices raised, a horn being blown somewhere far off, celebrating her. Celebrating a queen who, less than an hour ago, had been a scribe with a single silver coin in her boot. A queen who had been seen. Brindis pressed her forehead to the cold stone of the window frame and tried, very carefully, to think. The high speaker had wanted to remove her. The lords in blue had wanted to remove her. The woman in pale gold in the gallery had looked at her like a problem to be solved. None of them, had wanted what had happened tonight to stand. The only person in that entire hall who had spoken in her favor had been the Alpha King himself. And he had not even known her name. Or had he? I know who she is. The words rose unbidden, and she pressed her hand harder against her throat. He could not have known her. They had never met. She had never set foot in any chamber where he might have passed. She had been a faceless girl in a gray wool dress with her hair tied back and her head down. But he had looked at her, as if he had been looking for her. As if some long, terrible search had ended the moment her name appeared on that parchment, and the woman in pale gold had not been surprised. That, Brindis thought, was the part that made her hands tremble. The woman had not been surprised, which meant the woman had known something about her. Something Brindis herself did not know. And the dark-cloaked man behind her had been waiting for this. For her, long before the inkpot had ever tipped. She turned from the window and crossed the chamber in quick, quiet steps. There, at the foot of the great bed, her gray wool dress had been folded by the maids and left on a low chest, presumably to be burned. She knelt beside it and slid her fingers along the inner hem until she found what she had been looking for. A small folded square of parchment, sewn into the lining by her mother's hand, untouched for 16 years. Brindis had never opened it. Her mother had told her not to. Only if the ring grows hot, my heart. Only if you have nowhere else to turn. She tore the stitches with her teeth. The parchment unfolded into her palm. The handwriting was her mother's. Looped, careful. The hand of a woman who had been taught letters late in life and had loved them all the more for it. The message was very short. If you are reading this, the blood has woken. Trust no one in the high houses. Find the woman called Maren of the Hollow, in the salt marsh village of Brynhall, 3 days' walk south of the Spinewood. She knew your father. She will know what you are. Brindis read it twice. She will know what you are, not who, what. She closed her fist around the parchment and sat very still on the cold stone floor for a long moment. The white silk of the gown pooled around her like spilled milk. From somewhere outside, the celebration drums were still beating. From somewhere inside the palace, closer, much closer, she heard the soft, measured tread of boots in the corridor, stopping outside her door. She froze. The boots did not knock. They stood. 1 breath. 2. 3. Then they moved on. Brindis did not breathe again until they were gone. She rose. She moved. She did not have a plan. She did not have an ally. She did not have anything in the world but a folded piece of her mother's handwriting and the silver ring at her throat, and the certainty, as bright and cold as winter starlight, that if she stayed in this palace one more night, something in her was going to be taken from her. She stripped the silk gown. She pulled the gray wool dress over her head. She wrapped the moonstone circlet in a cloth and hid it beneath the bed, because she would not be a thief on top of everything else. She tied her hair back. She slid her mother's note into the inner pocket of her cloak, and then she went to the small servant's door at the back of the chamber. The door she had spotted the moment she walked in, because she had been a servant herself only hours ago, and she knew how palaces were built. And she opened it onto the narrow stair that the maids used to carry water and ash. The stair was empty. She went down. She did not run. Running drew eyes. She walked the way a tired maid walks at the end of a long day, head down, shoulders curved, hands tucked into her sleeves. She passed 2 pages who did not look up. She passed a guard who was leaning against a pillar half asleep. She passed through the lower kitchens, through the herb garden, through the postern gate where a single sentry was eating an apple. And she said, "The High Speaker has sent me to fetch the herbalist," in a small, frightened voice, and the sentry waved her through without ever lifting his eyes from the apple. The cold of the outer night struck her like a blow. She did not look back at the palace. She did not let herself. She walked along the lower lane until the bonfires of the celebrating city were behind her, and then she walked along the river road until the city itself was behind her, and only when the dark wall of the Spinewood rose up at last on the southern horizon did she allow herself to break into a run. In the high tower of the palace, behind a barred door that none of his betas had yet been able to open, the Alpha King of Veilmore lay on the stones of his own chamber with the drugged wine spilled beneath his cheek. His eyes half open and seeing nothing, his body locked rigid by a poison he had drunk in the first quiet minutes after the signing. He could not move. He could not call out. But the binding stones beneath the floor of the city were still glowing, and through the glow he felt, distantly, terribly, the precise moment his queen crossed the river beyond the southern wall and ran for the trees. A single tear slid sideways from the corner of his eye into the spilled wine. His first beta found him at the third dawn. By then, Brindis was already gone. 4 months later, the salt marsh village of Brynhall had stopped asking the quiet woman where she came from. She had arrived on foot in the last week of autumn, a young widow, she said, with no kin and no coin and a cough that had taken her voice for the first 3 days. She had given the name Hala to the first villager who asked, the first soft name that came to her mouth, and the name had stuck. The woman called Maren of the Hollow had taken one look at her face, one longer look at the silver ring she wore on a cord at her throat, and had brought her into the low stone cottage at the edge of Brynhall salt marsh without a single question. That had been 4 months ago. Now the first thaw was beginning to soften the edges of the marsh ice, and Hala, the herb wife, had become simply the gentle one who stays with old Maren. She helped Maren gather sea fennel before the tide. She bartered dried root and bone broth for goat milk at the headland farms. She tended fevers in the fishermen's children when the cold winds came down off the sea, and she would not take coin for it, only bread or a little wool. She did not give her real name to anyone, not even to Maren. Maren had not asked. That was the strangest part of it all, Brindis thought, as she knelt by the low window of the cottage and watched the salt mist roll in across the marsh in slow gray ribbons. Maren had never asked her name, never asked her bloodline, never asked what she was running from. The old woman had only looked at the silver ring on the cord and said, in a voice like wind through dry reeds, "That ring is older than your mother. Older than her mother. Keep it close, child, and we will see what we see." Brindis pressed her palm against the small swell beneath her dress, 4 months along, by Maren's quiet reckoning. Maren had laid her hand across Brindis's belly the second night and gone very still, very quiet. And then she had said something Brindis did not fully understand. 2 heartbeats, child, begun the night the binding lit. The stones do not only bind, they begin. Every Aldwen of every generation has been begun this way. In the moment the signing flared, you will not have known. Few of your line have ever been told. Brindis had stared at her then. I have never lain with him. No, Maren had said softly, and you would not need to. The line has never come from lying. It has come from the stones recognizing what has always belonged to one another, and beginning what was always meant to begin. There are 2 heartbeats, child, and one of them does not sound entirely human. Brindis had not asked what the second part meant. She had been too afraid of the answer. She had grown afraid of many things since the night she fled the palace. Afraid of footsteps on the marsh path, afraid of riders glimpsed through the reeds, afraid of the way the silver ring at her throat had begun, in the past fortnight, to feel warm again. Not burning, not yet, but warm, the way a banked coal is warm beneath the ash. He was searching for her. She knew it the way one knows a storm is coming before the first cloud crests the horizon. The bond, and she could call it nothing else, even to herself, even though she had only stood in his presence for the span of a single quarter-hour, had not faded. It had not even thinned. The high speaker had said, in her cold winter river voice, that an unconsummated binding would unravel within a moon. That if the new queen vanished before the marriage was sealed in flesh, the contract would dissolve and the king would be free. It had not dissolved. Brindis felt him every night. Not in dreams exactly, in the spaces between dreams. A hand pressed flat against the inside of her chest, searching for the shape of her heartbeat. A voice without sound saying her name in the dark. Brindis. Just that. Over and over, patient as a tide. She had begun, in the past week, to answer it without meaning to turn her face toward the north when she did not realize she was doing it, to wake with her hand pressed over the silver ring as if she had been cradling it in her sleep. "Stop," she would whisper to the dark. "Stop searching. I am not yours. I never was." But the children in her belly would shift then, both at once, as if disagreeing with her. The cottage door opened behind her. "You are at the window again," Maren said. Brindis did not turn. "The mist is pretty. The mist is cold, and you are 4 months gone with twins, and you have a face on you like a woman waiting for a knock at the door." The old woman's footsteps crossed the flagstones. A wooden cup was pressed into Brindis's hand. Hot. Smelling of nettle and something sweeter beneath. "Drink. Sit by the fire. Stop watching the road." Brindis took the cup but did not drink. "Maren." How did you know my mother?" It was the first time she had asked. 4 months, and she had not asked. The old woman was quiet for a long moment. The peat fire popped in the hearth. Outside, a marsh bird called once, low and lonely. "Your mother," Maren said at last, was the last of a line that the high houses tried very hard to forget. Her mother before her. And her mother's mother. They were not wolves, child. They were what came before wolves. She paused. "You wear that ring because without it, you would shine like a struck bell to anything in this kingdom that has wolf blood in it. And there is a great deal of wolf blood in this kingdom." Brindis turned slowly from the window. "What do you mean? What came before wolves?" But Maren was already looking past her, out through the open door, her sharp old eyes fixed on the marsh path. "I mean," the old woman said quietly, "that someone is coming up the path. And they are not from this village." Brindis's hand flew to the ring at her throat. It was no longer warm, it was hot. The traveler was alone, and on foot, and walking very slowly. Brindis stood in the shadow of the cottage doorway with Maren's hand pressed flat against her shoulder, holding her back, and watched the figure pick its way along the raised path between the salt pools. A man, cloaked in dark wool, a staff in one hand, a satchel across his back. He did not move like a soldier. He moved like a tired person who had been walking for many days. He did not look up at the cottage until he was 20 paces from the door. When he did, Brindis saw that he was very young, perhaps a year or two older than her. Pale face, a brown beard not yet thick, eyes red-rimmed from wind or weeping or both. He stopped at the threshold of the small herb garden and did not come closer. He set his staff down. He set his satchel down. He held his empty hands out from his sides. "Mistress Maren," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I am sent to you. From the road temple at Veska, Brother Olwyn sends greeting." Maren's hand on Brindis's shoulder did not loosen. "And what does Brother Olwyn want from an old marsh witch?" "Shelter for the night. Bread, if you have it. And to deliver a message that he says only you will understand." "What message?" The young man's throat worked. "He said to tell you, the wolf has not slept in 120 nights." The grip on Brindis's shoulder tightened so suddenly that she gasped. The young traveler did not seem to notice. He was looking only at Maren, his face exhausted, the hands held out from his body trembling now with the strain of being held there. "He said you would know what it meant," he said. "He said to tell you it grows worse. The eastern villages have been emptied. The herds have stopped giving milk. The old gods' standing stones in the high passes have begun to weep water that smells of iron. He said to tell you, Mistress Maren, he said the king is no longer entirely a man, do you understand? They keep him chained at the new moon. They keep him chained, mistress. And when his own betas approach him, he does not know them. Brother Olwyn says if she is not found by the spring equinox, he will not come back from it. He will stay a wolf forever." Brindis had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of the speech. The young man took a long, shuddering breath and finished. Brother Olwen says he is sorry to send you this. He says he would not, except that the doves are no longer reliable. The Lady Serenza intercepts them. He says, the young man's voice was now barely audible. He says if you have any word of her, mistress, any word at all, even a rumor, even a whisper, send it back with me. The kingdom is unraveling. Maren did not speak. For a long, long moment, no one in the garden spoke. The marsh mist rolled past them in slow ribbons. The salt birds called. Somewhere far off, the sea exhaled against the headland. Then Maren said very calmly, "Come inside, eat, sleep. We will speak in the morning." The young man's relief broke across his face like a wave. He bent to pick up his satchel, and as he bent, Brindis saw what had been hanging beneath the open neck of his cloak. A pendant, a small disc of tarnished silver, etched with a sigil she had seen exactly once in her life. Carved into the floor of the Hall of Iron Treaties. The same sigil that had glowed white the night she signed her name. Her hand flew to her ring before she could stop herself. The young man straightened. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her once since arriving. Maren had positioned her body to keep Brindis in shadow, deliberately, and Brindis only understood this now, far too late. And he passed into the cottage with his head down and his shoulders rounded with exhaustion, and Maren's voice was very gentle as she ushered him in and offered him the stool by the fire and a bowl of the nettle broth. Brindis stayed in the doorway. The young man sat by the fire. He held the bowl in both hands. He did not drink. He stared into the flames with the empty expression of someone who has walked a very long way, carrying a very heavy thing. Maren came back to Brindis. The old woman's face had gone the color of bone. She put her mouth close to Brindis's ear, and her whisper was a thread. "Child, listen to me. Do not move from this doorway. Do not speak. That young man is not what he says he is." Brindis went perfectly still. "He is wearing a relic mark of the Iron Treaty," Maren breathed. "No one outside the High Council and the king himself wears that mark. No one. Brother Olwen of Vesca has been gone these 9 years past. I have not had word from him in 9 years, and I would know it was him because he was my brother. Child, my own brother. And he passed in my arms of the lung rot in my own bed." Brindis could not swallow. "Someone sent him to find you," Maren whispered. "Someone who knew enough about my history to use my brother's name. Someone who did not know that I would know it for a lie." "Serenza," Brindis breathed. "Or worse than Serenza." Maren's hand closed around her wrist. "Listen to me, child. The boy is not alone. They never sent only one. They never. Look at me. Do not look at the path. Look at me." Brindis kept her eyes on Maren's face. "There will be others in the reeds," Maren said softly, watching, waiting for him to confirm. "We are going to walk you out of the back of this cottage, slow and quiet, through the herb shed, down to the boat I keep in the third creek. You are going to take the boat south to the headland. You are going to wait under the chalk cliffs until I come for you, or until 3 days have passed. Do you understand me? Maren, do you understand me?" Brindis nodded. The old woman pressed something small and cold into her hand. A knife. Bone-handled. Older than the cottage. "Go now," Maren breathed. Slowly, as if you are only fetching water. "Do not run until you are past the willow. Do you hear me, child? Do not run until you are past the willow, or they will come." Brindis turned. She walked very slowly toward the back of the cottage, past the hearth, past the young man with the false name and the relic mark, who did not lift his eyes, past the herb bundles drying from the rafters, through the low door into the herb shed, where the air was cold and green and smelled of crushed thyme. She stepped out into the marsh. The mist closed around her like a held breath. She walked, past the woodpile, past the goat pen, past the lichen-covered stone where Maren ground her roots, toward the willow at the edge of the property, where the path forked down into the creeks. She had almost reached it when, far behind her, she heard the sound she had been waiting for since the moment Maren had whispered they never send only one. A scream. Maren's scream. Cut off in the middle. And from the reeds on every side of her, all at once, the figures rose. There were 5 of them. They came out of the reeds the way wolves come out of a tree line, slow first, then very fast. And Brindis had time to do exactly one thing before they reached her. And what she did was lift the silver ring from her throat over her head. She did not know why she did it. She only knew that Maren had said the ring keeps you small, and that being small was no longer going to save her. She closed her fist around it. The mist around her changed. It did not lift. It thickened. It darkened. The way water darkens when something deep stirs the silt at the bottom, and the 5 figures running toward her staggered as if they had run into a wall they could not see. The closest one, a tall man in a dark hood, a curved blade already drawn, went to one knee with a sound like he had been struck, his free hand flying to his ear as if something inside it had burst. Brindis took one step back. The mist moved with her. A second figure dropped. A third stumbled, his hands flying to his face as if struck by something he could not see. The 4th and 5th stopped where they were, 20 paces off, and from the shape of their hooded heads, Brindis understood that they could not see her anymore at all. The ring was hot in her fist, so hot she should have been screaming. She was not screaming. She did not understand why she was not screaming. She knew your father. She will know what you are. The mother's note. The voice that had said it. What? Not who. Brindis took another step back. Slow. Careful. The way you back away from a horse that has not yet decided whether to bolt. The closest hooded man was on his hands and knees in the wet grass now, panting, and his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He raised his head. His eyes met hers across the dark salt grass, and what she saw in them was not hatred. It was terror. He had seen what she was, and he was terrified of her. Witch blood, he gasped. She's witch blood, Serenza didn't say. She didn't say. Where is Maren? Brindis said, and her own voice did not sound like her own voice. It sounded older, lower, as if something else was speaking through her. The man did not answer. She took another step toward him. The mist boiled. Where is Maren? Gone. The man choked, and his hands were shaking now, both hands, and he was no longer looking at her face. He was looking at the air around her face, as if he could see something there that she could not. She fought. The boy is gone. The others, please, please, lady. I have a child, I have a... Behind him, the marsh erupted. Not the men. Something else. A shape. Black. Vast. Moving with a speed the mist could not hide. Broke through the reeds at the far side of the path and was on the second hooded figure before the man had time to lift his head. Brindis saw, in flashes, a great wolf, half again the size of any wolf she had ever seen, eyes like winter sun through amber, fur the color of wet slate. The second figure went down without a sound, and the third was already turning to run when the wolf was on him, and the 4th and 5th, the 2 who had stopped, the 2 who could no longer see her, were already drawing blades and shouting and trying to find the source of the slaughter through the thick mist. The wolf moved through them in less time than it took Brindis to draw a single breath. He fell upon them the way a storm falls upon dry grass, without rage, without slowness, with a kind of awful, focused efficiency that told her this was not the first time, not the 10th time, not the 100th time he had done this in recent days. Then it stopped. It stood in the marsh grass with its sides heaving, the wet of the night dark on its muzzle, and very, very slowly it turned its enormous head toward the place where she stood. And the mist, as if it knew what it was looking at, parted around her. The wolf saw her. It made a sound. Not a growl, not a howl. Something between a whine and a sob. The sound of a creature that has been searching for one thing and one thing only for 120 nights, and has finally found it. It took one step toward her, and collapsed. It went down in the wet grass and lay on its side, ribs heaving, and Brindis understood with a cold, terrible certainty what she was looking at. This was not a hunting wolf. This was not a beast in its prime. This was a creature that had not slept in 120 nights, that had hunted across a kingdom on instinct alone, that had run itself to the very edge of what a body could endure to find her, and now that it had, it could not stand up. She closed her fist tighter on the silver ring. The mist began to thin. She did not put the ring back on. She walked across the wet grass, very slowly, and she knelt beside the great wolf in the dark of the marsh, and she put her hand, without thinking, God's, she did not think, onto the wide flat plane of his skull between his ears. The wolf shuddered, and shifted. It was not the dramatic, bone-cracking transformation she had heard whispered of in the kitchens of the palace. It was slow. It was painful to watch. The fur receded in patches, the bones realigned by degrees, as if reluctantly. The body that emerged at last from the wolf's was thinner than it should have been, and shadowed beneath the eyes, and shivering in the cold marsh grass beneath the long gray cloak Vesia had thrown over him without breaking her stride, and unmistakably the man who had, 4 months ago, looked up across the Hall of Iron Treaties and said, "It's done." The Alpha King of Veilmore lay in the wet grass at her knee, half conscious, and he reached up with a hand that shook badly and laid it on the small swell of her belly. His eyes found hers. "You are real," he whispered. It came out cracked. "You are real. I thought—" He could not finish. His hand on her belly was very gentle. "I thought I had begun to invent you." Brindis could not move. Behind her, somewhere in the mist, more figures were coming. Riders. Soft hoofbeats on the marsh path. She heard the metallic chime of harness, the low calling of voices, pack voices, men's voices, trusted voices. And she understood that he had not come alone. He had brought his betas, and they had been following him for days, perhaps weeks, perhaps the entire 120 nights, trying to keep him alive. The hand on her belly moved, very slightly. He felt the kick. Both kicks. From 2 different places. His eyes closed. A single tear ran from the corner of his eye down into the wet grass. 2. He breathed. The stones began them. The night you signed. I felt it across the bond, and I did not understand. The healers told me what it must mean, and I did not let myself believe them, because if it were true, then I had not only lost my mate, I had lost— He could not breathe. A figure had appeared at the edge of the mist. Tall. A woman. Older than Brindis, younger than Maren. Silver at her temples and a long gray cloak. She held up an empty hand to show that it was empty, and her eyes, kind eyes, exhausted eyes, went from Brindis's face to the king's face, to the swell of Brindis's belly, and something in the woman's face broke and remade itself, all in the span of a single breath. "My lady queen," the woman said softly, and went to one knee in the wet grass. "My name is Vesia. I am the king's first beta. We have been searching for you since the night you signed." "Why?" Brindis whispered. "Why? I am no one. I was a scribe. I was nothing." He had never seen me. "Why?" The first beta lifted her face. "My lady," she said. He had seen you, Every night for 9 years, in dreams that woke him screaming. He did not know your name. He did not know your face by daylight. But when you walked into the Hall of Iron Treaties 3 weeks before the contract, the binding stones beneath the floor recognized you, and they had been waiting 9 years to do it. She took a long, careful breath. My lady, the contract was a trap, but it was not your trap. The Lady Serenza has known what you are for far longer than you have. She placed a watcher in the chancery the day you arrived. She arranged for the ink pot to be left where you would knock it. She arranged for the side door of the hall to be unlocked. She wanted your name on that parchment, my lady, because as long as you were hidden in the kingdom, she could not find you. And as long as she could not find you, she could not. The first beta stopped. She looked at the king. The king's eyes were closed. He was not breathing well. Could not what? Brindis said. The first beta's face was very gentle now, very careful. Could not finish what her family began 9 years ago, she said. Which is to say, my lady, the silencing of every woman in your bloodline. Your mother was the last one they took. They believed they had taken her child as well. Her eyes went to the silver ring still clenched in Brindis's fist. They were wrong. And they have spent the last 9 years looking for you. The contract is not the danger to you. The contract is the only thing keeping you safe. As long as you are bound to him by the binding stones, House Serenza cannot raise a blade to you in the open, because the binding would feel it, and the kingdom would know. And in secret, Brindis whispered. The first beta's mouth tightened. In secret, my lady, they have been hunting you for 4 months. The men in the marsh tonight were the 7th group sent. There are more on the way. There will always be more on the way. Until we end them or they end this. There is no other road. Brindis looked down at the man at her knee. His eyes were open again. Just barely. I am sorry, he said, and his voice was almost gone. I am sorry. I should have come for you that first night. I tried. They drugged the wine 3 minutes after you signed. I drank because it was set before me, because no one had ever drugged a king at his own signing in 900 years, and I did not think to refuse it. I went down on the stones of my own chamber and I could not move, and I could not speak, and I felt you cross the river, Brindis. I felt you cross the river, and I could not call out. By the time I woke, he swallowed. By the time I woke at the 3rd dawn, you had already been gone 3 days. His eyes closed. His hand on her belly went slack. And from the southern edge of the marsh, where the dark line of the spine wood rose up against the deeper dark of the night sky, a horn sounded. Not Vesia's horn. Not a beta's horn. A horn Brindis had heard exactly once in her life. At the celebration in the lower ward of the palace, the night she had fled it. The horn of House Serenza. The first beta's head snapped up. They are here, she said. The horn sounded again. Closer. Brindis was on her feet before she knew she had moved. Vesia was already shouting to figures Brindis could not yet see. 3, 4, 5 betas rising from the reeds where they had been crouched, mist parting around them like cloth, and 2 of them were running toward the king with a stretcher of bound saplings already half assembled in their hands. Get him into the trees. Ah, Vesia snapped. Calder, the western line. Halvar, take the marsh path. They will come from the south road. They always do. Hold them as long as you can. Her eyes found Brindis. My lady, we need to move. He cannot be moved, Brindis said. Look at him. Look at him. He cannot. He must be. Vesia knelt. With surprising gentleness, she lifted the king's wrist and pressed 2 fingers to it. Her face did not change, but something in her eyes did. His pulse is bad. The shift took the last of him. If they find him here on the ground, he is lost, my lady. Do you understand me? Lost. And if he is lost, the binding goes with him, and you will be standing in a marsh with no king and no contract and no protection from the people coming up that road. Brindis's hand had closed again on the silver ring without her realizing. "Put it back on," Vesia said, very quietly. Brindis looked down at her. "The ring, my lady. Put it back on. I do not yet know in full what you did with the mist a moment ago, and we will speak of it when we are not all about to fall. But for now, put the ring back on. The Serenza riders will have a tracker with them. The tracker will have your scent. If you are still blazing, when they reach this clearing, the tracker will see you across half the marsh." Brindis lifted the cord. The ring slid back over her head and settled against her throat, and the world went small again. The strange, low, animal awareness of the air, the pressure in the back of her skull, the sense of the children inside her humming like plucked strings, all of it drained away as if a door had closed inside her chest. She missed it instantly. She did not have time to think about that. The two betas had the stretcher under the king. They lifted him with the careful, practiced quickness of men who had done this before. Many times, perhaps, over the past 4 months. And Brindis saw, only then, the long, shallow scars along the king's ribs and the half-healed wound on his shoulder that had not been there 4 months ago. He had been hunted too, the whole way. She turned toward the cottage, toward where Maren. "Do not," Vesia said softly. "My lady, do not. There is no time, and there is nothing in that cottage now that you can help." Brindis closed her eyes for the span of 1 heartbeat. Maren, the old woman who had asked no questions, who had pressed nettle broth into her hand, who had said we will see what we see, who had screamed and been cut off mid-scream because Brindis had walked past the willow without looking back. She opened her eyes. "Where do we go?" she said. "North," Vesia said. "Through the spinewood. There is a holdfast at Creche that the Serenza cannot reach without crossing 2 packed territories that hate them. We will be there by dawn if we move now." The horn sounded a 3rd time, not closer. The same place. They had stopped at the southern edge of the marsh, which meant they were forming up, which meant they would come hard and together, and very soon. Brindis began to move. They went north along a deer track Brindis would never have seen on her own. Vesia walked it as if she had walked it 100 times, and perhaps she had. And the 2 betas with the stretcher fell in behind them, the king pale and unmoving on the woven saplings. 3 more betas peeled off into the reeds in the other direction, drawing blades, drawing breath, settling into the long, deliberate calm of fighters who knew exactly what they were preparing to do if it came to that. Brindis did not look back at them. She walked. The first arrow came within a 1/4 mile. It came from the wrong direction. Not the south, where the horn had sounded, but the west, where no horn had sounded at all. And it struck the lead beta down before any of them heard the bowstring. He fell without a sound. The stretcher tilted. The second beta caught it with a grunt of effort, and Brindis saw, as she spun toward the trees, 3 figures stepping out of the dark of the spinewood ahead of them. Not Serenza riders. Mercenaries, dressed in nothing she recognized. Faces wrapped in dark cloth. The horn had been a feint. "Down!" Vesia roared, and Brindis went down. The second arrow took the bark off the tree where her head had been. She crawled, on her hands and knees, the swell of her belly heavy and awkward beneath her, and Vesia was already moving to meet the 3 figures with her sword drawn, and Brindis understood with absolute clarity that Vesia was outmatched. 1 beta, 3 trained fighters. The math was not difficult. She fumbled at the cord at her throat. "Do not put the ring back on," she thought she heard Maren say, very far away. "They will see you. The tracker." But there was no tracker. The tracker was a lie. There was only Vesia about to fall in the dark of the spinewood, and the king bleeding on a stretcher behind her, and the children in her belly humming again, urgent now, urgent and insistent, and Brindis lifted the ring over her head a 2nd time. The mist did not come this time. There was no mist beneath the spinewood pines. What came instead was the air itself. She felt it the way she had felt the binding stones light beneath the floor of the hall of iron treaties, a deep, resonant yes that did not ask her permission. And the air around the three mercenaries thickened all at once, hardened. Brindis saw the lead figure raise his bow for a third shot, and she saw his arm slow as if it were moving through honey, and she saw his eyes widen above the dark cloth of his face wrap, and she saw the bowstring snap as he tried to draw it through air that was no longer air. Vesia did not waste the moment. She struck down the first one before he understood what had happened to his bow. She struck down the second before he had finished turning toward her. The third dropped his blade and ran, and Brindis let him run, because she could feel, somehow she could feel, that he was running back to whoever had sent him, and whoever had sent him needed to hear what had just happened in the spinewood, and that was a thing Brindis suddenly, fiercely wanted them to hear. The air thinned again. Vesia stood very still in the dark. She turned slowly. Her eyes found Brindis where Brindis had risen to one knee in the leaf litter, the silver ring clenched in one fist, the other hand pressed to the small of her back. "My lady," the first beta said, and her voice was not quite steady. "What are you?" "I do not know," Brindis said. It was the truest thing she had ever said in her life. Then Vesia's mouth softened, very slightly, and her shoulders eased, and she said, half to Brindis and half to herself, "Untrained Aldwens do not choose their element. The kingdom answers in whatever shape it has nearest at hand. The marsh gave you mist. The wood gave you air. The stones, when we reach them, the stones will give you what only Aldwens are given." She drew a long breath. "My lady, we had not dared hope. Not really. Not after 9 years of empty rooms. Forgive me. We need to keep moving." Behind them, on the stretcher, the Alpha King made a low broken sound and turned his face toward Brindis in the dark. He had felt it. Across the half-built thing that had been pulling at her for 4 months, he had felt the air harden. He had felt her use something she did not have a name for. And his head turned toward her in the dark like a compass needle finding north. His eyes opened. Only halfway. They found her face. "My heart," he whispered. She had never heard the words used that way before. Not as endearment, not as poem, but as address. As the thing one calls a person who is part of one's chest. And she felt the sound of it strike her somewhere behind the silver ring, in the place the ring could not quite cover anymore. She did not put the ring back on this time. Vesia saw, and did not say anything. They moved. The holdfast at Kresh was older than the kingdom. Brindis saw it first as a shape against the lightening sky. A low ring of black stone on the crown of a wooded hill, half swallowed by ivy, the gates so old that the iron had gone soft and dark. And Vesia led them through a side passage that opened only when the first beta laid her palm flat against a particular pale stone and waited for it to warm. Inside, there was warmth. Old warmth. A great fire burning in a hearth that Brindis understood, without being told, had not been allowed to go out in 900 years. There were beds. There were healers. There were quiet, exhausted men and women in gray wool who looked at Brindis with expressions she could not yet read. Not hostility, not welcome, but something more careful, something more wary, the look of people who had been told a great many things about a person they had never met. They took the king from her. She let them. She did not have the strength to fight it. They carried him through a low doorway, and a woman with iron-gray braids and ink-stained fingers came forward and laid hands on his chest and began to speak in the old tongue, the same old tongue the binding had been written in, and the words made the air tremble in a way Brindis recognized. She was led gently to a small chamber off the main hall. There was a bed. There was a basin of warm water, a folded clean dress of soft gray wool, a stool by the fire, and a tray of food that someone had laid out very carefully. Broth, bread, a small dish of dried apples, the careful provisions one makes for a woman 4 months gone with twins who has not eaten properly in days. She did not eat. She washed her face in the warm water, and she sat down on the stool, and she put her face in her hands. And she did not cry, because she had not yet permitted herself to cry, and she was afraid that if she began, she would not stop. A long time passed. The door opened, very softly. She did not lift her head. "My lady," Vesia's voice said, "he is asking for you. The healer says he will live. He says he will not sleep until he has seen you. I told him he was a fool. He told me to bring you anyway, please." Brindis lifted her head. The first beta had washed too. Her face was hollowed by exhaustion. She was leaning against the doorframe as if without it she would fall. "Vesia," Brindis said, "how long has he been like this? Truly." The first beta closed her eyes. 121 nights, she said. He drank the drugged wine the moment the council emptied the hall after the signing, and he went down on the stones of his own chamber, and we could not break the door for 3 full days because it had been locked from outside by someone with the king's own key. He has not been fully a man since. He comes back. We bring him back. We chain him at the new moon and the dark moon, and we feed him meat, and we sit with him through the worst nights, and he comes back enough to give orders and to read the maps, and to send the riders. But he does not come all the way back, my lady. Not since you left." Her eyes opened. "I think tonight is the first night he will." Brindis followed her down the long stone corridor. They had laid him in a chamber lit only by firelight. He had been bathed, his wounds rebound, a clean shirt drawn over him. He looked thinner in the firelight than she had let herself see in the marsh. His eyes were closed. His hand rested on the coverlet, palm up, as if he had reached out for something in his sleep and forgotten it there. Brindis stood in the doorway. "Go in," Vesia said quietly behind her. "I will be at the end of the hall." The door closed. Brindis stood for a long time without moving. Then she crossed the room, slowly, very slowly, and sat down on the low stool that someone had drawn up beside the bed for exactly this. She did not take his hand. She did not touch him. She sat, and she looked at his face, and after a long time she said in a very small voice, "I do not know you." His eyes opened. He looked at her without speaking for the span of perhaps 3 breaths. His eyes were clearer than they had been in the marsh. The fever had broken, or the worst of it had. He looked at her the way one looks at something one has been told is real but has not, until that moment, been entirely sure of. "I know," he said. "You said my name in the marsh as if you knew me. You said my heart. I do not know you. I have stood in the same room with you for 1/4 of an hour in my entire life. You are a stranger to me, do you understand? I am carrying your children. Children I never lay with you to make, children that the stones made the night I signed, and which I have only learned in the past month were even possible, and I am bound to you by a contract I did not mean to sign. People are falling for me. Maren is gone because of me, and I do not know your name, Alpha King. I do not even know your name." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, very gently, "Theron. My name is Theron Veilmore. I should have given it to you the night you signed. I should have given it to you the moment you fell into my hall with the inkpot, and I should have walked across that hall to you instead of speaking from the dark, and I am sorry. Brindis, I am so sorry. Will you let me try to tell you who I am now?" Brindis put her hand over her mouth. The Alpha King of Veilmore lay very still in the firelight and did not look away from her. "Theron," she said at last. The name was strange in her mouth. She made herself say it again. "Theron, you owe me. You owe me a great many things. Begin somewhere. Yes, he said. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. When he opened them, they were very tired and very steady. I dreamed of you for 9 years. I did not know your name. I did not know your face by daylight. I knew the sound of you. The way you breathed. A laugh I had heard once. The shape of a hand I had never held. I thought I was going mad. The healers told me alphas sometimes feel their fated mates before they meet them. But never for 9 years. Never that long. And I came to believe, slowly, over those years, that the woman I was dreaming of was already gone. That I had felt her come into the world and then leave it across a distance, and that what I would carry for the rest of my life was the ghost of someone I had never been allowed to meet. 3 weeks before the contract, the binding stones beneath the Hall of Iron treaties woke up. They had not woken in 140 years. The keepers of the hall came to me and said something has entered the chancery that the stones recognize, and I went to the chancery that night. And I walked through every chamber where the scribes worked, and his voice caught. I walked past you twice, Brindis. Twice. You did not look up. You were copying a tax roll. The second time I walked past you, I almost spoke. I did not. Because I did not know what I would say. Because I did not yet trust what the stones were telling me. I went back to my chambers and I drafted the contract that night. And I wrote into it a clause the council did not see. A clause that said the binding would attach to whichever name was written willingly upon the parchment in my presence, regardless of the names listed. I did this because I was a coward. Brindis, I did this because I could not bring myself to walk back into the chancery and ask you your name. I told myself it was strategy. It was not strategy. It was a coward hoping fate would do for him what he could not do for himself. Brindis lowered her hand. You drafted a contract that would trap me, she said. Yes. Without my knowing. Yes. You let me sign my own life away because you could not say good evening to me in a corridor. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. That is the worst thing I have ever heard, she said finally. It is also the most cowardly thing I have ever heard. And I worked in a chancery, Theron. I have heard a great many cowardly things. I know. Why are you telling me this? Because you said you do not know me. And the only way you will ever know me is if I do not lie to you. Not once. Not about anything. Not about the worst things I have done. Not about the worst thing I am about to tell you. She went still. What is the worst thing you are about to tell me? She said. He drew a long, careful breath. Serenza is not the only one. Serenza is the front of the thing that has been hunting your bloodline. There is someone behind her. Someone who has been behind her family for 3 generations. I have not yet told Vesia who it is, because if I tell her, she will move against him, and she will fail, and she will fall. I have not yet told anyone. But the moment we leave this holdfast, you and I, we are walking back toward him, because there is no other road. And he is... The king's voice was very level now, very quiet. He is my uncle Brindis, Lord Caloran Vesh. He is my father's brother. He raised me after my parents died. He sat beside me in the council when I was 12 years old and frightened of my own crown, and he held my hand under the table so the lords would not see. And he is the man who has been ending the women of your bloodline since before you were born. Brindis closed her eyes. And you have known this, she said. I have suspected this, since the night the binding stones woke. I have known it for certain since the morning I woke from the drug at the 3rd dawn, because the only person in the kingdom with both the access to the wine and the knowledge of which compound would suppress an alpha's wolf is my uncle. He drugged me, Brindis, to stop me from claiming you, to stop the binding from completing. He failed, because you signed your name and the stones began the children before he could finish his work. He has been trying to undo that failure ever since. And you cannot move against him because he holds the southern half of the kingdom in his hand, because the army answers to him as much as to me, because the council is half his. Because if I move against him before I have proof the lords cannot deny, the kingdom splits into a war that will cost 10,000 lives, and our children. He stopped. He had to stop. And our children will be born into a country at war with itself. Brindis opened her eyes. She looked at the man in the bed. The man who was a stranger to her. The man who had drafted a contract to trap her because he was too much of a coward to speak to her in a corridor. The man whose uncle had taken her mother from her. The man whose hand was still resting palm up on the coverlet. Exactly where it had been when she walked in, because he was too proud to ask her to take it, and too honest to pretend he did not want her to. She reached out and laid her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, slowly, as if afraid she would change her mind. She did not. "All right, Theron," she said quietly. "Then by the next full moon, your uncle's hold on this kingdom is going to end. I would prefer to face him at your side." They rode out of Creche 4 days later, and she did not ride pillion behind him. She rode beside him. It had been Vesia's idea. The kingdom needs to see her enter the capital as a queen, not as a recovered fugitive, the first beta had said, in the long council that had filled the holdfast's main hall on the second night. They will see her ride at his right hand on a white horse with the Aldwyn colors on her cloak, and they will understand. They will understand without a single word being spoken. The Aldwyn colors. Brindis had not known her family had colors. A gray-green, like marsh water under cloud. A silver stitched at the hem in the old letters Maren had once tried, very gently, to teach her to read. The seamstress at the holdfast had wept, quietly, while she pinned the cloak. An old woman, 80 if she was a day. And when Brindis had asked her why she wept, the old woman had said only my grandmother sewed this thread, my lady. She told me to keep it for the daughter who would come back. Brindis had not known her grandmother had sewn anything for her either. She was learning a great deal, in those 4 days at the holdfast, about a family she had not known she had. The Aldwyns, Vesia had said, sitting with her one evening by the fire while Theron slept under the healer's draught, had once been the keepers of the binding stones themselves. Not wolves. Older than wolves. The stones were laid by your foremothers, my lady. The hall of iron treaties was theirs before it was the king's. The first Alpha King married into your line, not the other way around. That is the thing your enemies have been trying to erase for 9 generations. The original power of this kingdom is in the women of your blood, and the wolves who rule it have only ever ruled it because your foremothers permitted it. Brindis had stared into the fire for a very long time. "And the children," she had said at last. "Vesia, help me understand. Children begun by a binding. What are they?" Vesia had been quiet. "The children, my lady, are the first of their line in 9 generations to be begun by an Alpha and an Aldwyn at a fully lit binding. We do not know what they will be. We do not know what they will be able to do. The healers can hear 2 heartbeats. They can also hear, and I tell you this because you are their mother and you have a right to know, they can hear 3 sets of breath. 2 children, and something that breathes around them. A guardian, perhaps. A presence. The healers do not have a word for it. They only know that no woman in this holdfast has ever heard the like." Brindis had laid her hand on her belly. The children had moved. Both at once. And beneath them, she had felt, for the first time, the soft, slow third pulse Vesia was describing. Not a kick. A presence, as if something patient and very old was curled around them, listening. She had not been afraid. She did not know what that said about her. She had not been afraid. Now she rode beside Theron down the Old North Road, with 300 riders behind her, and the standard of House Aldwyn carried for the first time in 9 generations on a tall pole at her right shoulder, and the villages they passed were emptying into the road to look at her. Not at him. At her. Old women coming out of doorways with their hands pressed to their mouths. Children running alongside the column for a quarter mile before their mothers called them back. An old man at a crossroads who fell to his knees in the mud when she rode past and said something she could not hear over the hoofbeats, but that made Theron beside her draw in a sharp breath and look at her with eyes very full. "What did he say?" she asked. Theron did not answer for a moment. "He said the Marsh mother is come back." She turned in the saddle to look at him. "That is what they used to call your foremothers," he said quietly. "Before the wolves. When the kingdom was smaller and wetter and the people lived along the salt coasts and the inland marshes. The mothers of the marshes, the mothers of the mist." His mouth softened. "I have not heard the words spoken aloud in my lifetime. I did not know they were still remembered." "And you," Brindis said. "What did you think when you first heard the binding stones name me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I thought," he said, "that the kingdom was about to remember what it was." They reached the outskirts of the capital on the morning of the 5th day, and Veilmore was burning. Not the city itself. The city stood, towers and all, the great black walls untouched. But the lower wards, the merchant quarter, the long strip of warehouses along the river. Smoke poured up into the dawn sky in 3 fat black columns. The bells were ringing, and they were not the celebration bells of 4 months ago. They were the bells of war within the walls, the deep iron tones of a city that had begun to fight itself. Vessia rode up beside them at a hard canter. Her face was the color of wet ash. "My king, the doves have come in. Lord Vesh has named himself Lord Protector. He has accused you of being possessed by the ghost blood of an old enemy of the realm. He has called for the binding to be dissolved on the grounds that the queen is—" Her eyes flicked to Brindis. Her voice lost its steadiness. "Is a witch thing of the old gods, my lady? Those are his words, not mine. And that the children she carries are not children, but something that must not be allowed to be born. He has the southern army at the river gate. He has 140 lords sworn to him as of last night. He has the chancery," Theron said quietly. "Yes. He has the binding stones." "Yes, my king." Theron was silent for a long, long moment. Then he said, "He cannot break the binding. He can only end one of us to break it. He knows this." "Yes, my king." "And he has chosen. He has chosen the queen, my king. The riders he has sent into the lower ward are searching every house with the queen's description. He has put a price of 40,000 gold on her head. Not for capture." Brindis felt the blood leave her face. 40,000 gold. The price of a small kingdom. The price the Serenza had not been willing to pay, because the Serenza had been the front. And the front does not pay the prices the back pays. Lord Vesh was paying the back's price now. Which meant Lord Vesh was no longer hiding. "He thinks you will leave me somewhere safe," she said slowly. "He thinks you will hide me, and ride on alone, and try to take the chancery without me, and lose. Because without me the binding stones will not answer to you, the way they did the night I signed." Theron turned and looked at her. "Yes," he said. "He is correct that you would lose without me. Yes. He is incorrect that you will leave me anywhere." Theron's mouth moved. It was almost a smile. It was the first almost smile she had seen on him since the marsh. "My heart," he said. "Do not my heart me," Brindis said. "We are riding into the city, together. Now." The seamstress did not sew 9 generations of silver thread into this cloak, so that I could watch the chancery burn from a hill. Vessia made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob, Or might have been both. Theron lifted his hand, and the column behind them began to move. They rode into Veilmore as the bells rang the 7th hour, and the smoke parted around them like the mist had parted in the marsh, and Brindis Aldwyn, the queen who had been a scribe, the scribe who had been a marsh mother's daughter, the daughter of 9 generations of women who had not been allowed to fade quietly, rode beneath the great black gate of her own city for the first time in her life, and the gate guards on the wall above her looked down at the standard of House Aldwyn and dropped their pikes. Not in surrender, in recognition. The first of the Southern Army's lines, when they saw her, did the same. The second did not. The horns of Lord Vesh blew, and the river gate opened, and the man who had held her husband's hand under the council table when her husband had been 12 years old rode out at the head of 3,000 swords to end her line forever. Lord Caloran Vesh rode at the head of his 3,000 on a horse the color of old iron. He was not what Brindis had pictured. She had pictured someone like the High Speaker, sharp, wintry, obvious. The man who reined his horse to a halt in the burning street 50 paces from her was small, slim, silver-haired and gentle-eyed, with the kind face of a beloved tutor or a country priest. He wore no armor, only a long gray coat and a single thin chain of office at his throat, and when he raised his hand, the 3,000 riders behind him stopped without a word. He smiled at her, not Theron, as if she were the only person in the smoking street. "Brindis," he said. His voice carried soft and clear. "Child, I am sorry it has come to this. I am sorry to be the one who has to do this. I want you to know that." "Do not speak to her," Theron said. The words came out like something tearing. "Theron." Lord Vesh turned the gentle eyes on his nephew. "Theron, my boy, listen to me. You are not yourself. You have not been yourself in many months. The things in that woman's belly are calling to your wolf the way drowning calls to drowning men. I know you cannot hear me right now. I know. I am going to be very kind to you when this is over. I have always been kind to you. Have I not always been kind to you?" Theron did not answer. His hand on the reins had begun to shake. Brindis felt it through the bond, the first time she had felt anything through it that was not love or fear or longing, the first time she had felt him in the texture of his own thinking. And what she felt was a child of 12 years old being held under a council table by a hand he had trusted, and that child realizing, 16 years too late, that he had never been held. He had been kept. The way one keeps a thing one is not yet ready to use. She nudged her horse forward one step, just one. "Lord Vesh," she said. The gentle eyes returned to her. "You sent men to take my mother before I was born," she said. "You sent men to take my grandmother. You have sent men to end every woman of my line for 90 years. You sent 7 groups to silence me in 4 months. You took Maren of the Hollow 2 nights ago in her own kitchen, and she was 81 years old, and she had done you no harm. I want to know why." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "Because your foremothers refused the wolf, child, 9 generations ago. They were offered the bond, and they refused it, and they walked back into their marshes, and they took the binding stones with them. The real stones, child, the ones beneath the ones in the hall. And they hid them in places no wolf has ever been allowed to find. Your line has held the keys to this kingdom for 900 years and has refused to use them, and every generation we have begged, and every generation you have refused, and so every generation we have done what kings have always done with a key that will not open for them." "You broke the lock," Brindis said. "We broke the line," Lord Vesh said, still gentle. "Forgive me, the line that would not turn the key. I am not a cruel man, Brindis. I would rather not have done any of it. But the kingdom needs the stones, and the stones need an Aldwen, and an Aldwin who will not give them is not an Aldwin the kingdom can afford to keep alive. His soft mouth softened further. And now there are 2 of you in your belly, and one of them is a girl. The healers have told me. Forgive me, child. Forgive me. I do not have a choice. He raised his hand a second time. The 3,000 drew their swords as one. Brindis lifted the silver ring from her throat over her head. She did not close her fist around it this time. She held it out, on its open cord, in her open palm. And she let it fall. It struck the cobblestones of Veilmore with a small, clear sound, like a bell struck once and let go. The street answered. Not the air this time, not the mist. The stones. The cobbles beneath the horses. The foundations beneath the burning warehouses. The great black wall of the city behind her. Every shaped stone in the lower ward of Veilmore hummed, a deep, low note like a struck temple bell, and Brindis felt it the way she had felt the binding stones light beneath the floor of the hall of iron treaties. The same resonant yes, the same patient old voice answering a question it had been waiting 900 years to be asked. The horses of the Southern Army screamed and broke. Not all of them. Half. 2/3. The horses whose riders were sworn to Lord Vesh by oath of blood. The deepest oath. The oath the binding stones could hear. Bolted backward into their own lines, and the riders behind them went down beneath their own panicked cavalry, and the front rank of the 3,000 collapsed inward in a sudden braying chaos of hooves and dust and falling men. Lord Vesh's horse did not bolt. His horse stood very still beneath him, and the gentle face above the gray coat went, for the first time, not gentle. "You have not been taught," he said. His voice was beginning to rise. "You do not know what you are doing. You will undo yourself, child. An untrained Aldwin cannot hold the stones. You will tear from every—" "I know," Brindis said. She did know. She had felt it the moment the cobbles answered. The price of asking. The slow heat already beginning at the small of her back. The warm wet running down the inside of her wrist where she had not realized her own nose had begun to bleed. Untrained Aldwins could not hold the stones for long. She did not need long. "Theron," she said, without turning her head. "Now would be a good moment." The Alpha King of Veilmore, who had been holding himself upright in his saddle by will alone, who had been waiting for her, who had understood the moment she dropped the ring exactly what she was going to do, and exactly what it was going to cost her, moved. He shifted in the saddle. He did not shift the way he had shifted in the marsh. He did not collapse. He did not falter. The shape that came out of him was clean, the shift of a wolf at the height of his strength, of an alpha whose mate had just laid the foundations of his city open beneath him like a road, and the great slate-gray wolf hit the ground running and crossed the 50 paces between them and Lord Vesh in 3 bounds. Lord Vesh's hand went to the inside of his gray coat. Brindis saw the silver flash of the small thin blade. Wolfsbane, of course it was Wolfsbane. Of course he had been carrying it for 30 years against this exact moment. And she said, very quietly, to the cobbles beneath Lord Vesh's horse, "Hold him." The cobbles obliged. Lord Vesh's horse went down on its forelegs as if its hooves had grown into the street. The small, thin blade flew from Lord Vesh's hand. He pitched forward over the horse's neck, and the slate-gray wolf reached him before he hit the ground, and Brindis closed her eyes. She did not need to see this part. She did not want to see this part. She had asked the kingdom to do this, and the kingdom was doing it. But she did not need to watch. And she heard quite clearly the small final sound her husband's uncle made. It sounded like a man surprised, not afraid, surprised, as if he had not quite believed, until the very last instant, that the key would ever turn. The cobbles released. Brindis opened her eyes. She was no longer on her horse. She was on her knees in the street, and Vesia was beside her with both hands pressed to her shoulders, and there was a darkening across the front of her gray-green cloak. more than she had realized was possible, and the children in her belly were humming, a sound she could feel in her teeth, and around them the third pulse, the slow, patient guardian, was no longer slow. It was fast. It was bracing them. It was holding the small bodies still, while their mother's body did what their mother's body was doing. "Hold on," Vesia was saying. "My lady, hold on, look at me." She looked. Past Vesia, the slate-gray wolf was already running back to her, not pursuing the rest, running to her. The Southern Army, what was left of it, the part that had not bolted, the part that had not been sworn an oath of blood, was throwing down its swords. A lord she did not know was kneeling in the street with his arms held out from his body. Another. Behind them, dragged from a barred carriage at the rear of the southern column, the Lady Serenza was forced to her knees in the smoke by two of her own dishonored captains, her pale gold gown filthy at the hem, her painted mouth opening on a scream no one stopped to listen to. The bells of Veilmore were beginning to change their tone, the deep iron of war within the walls shifting note by note into something else, something Brindis did not recognize, but that the people in the doorways did, because they had begun to weep. The wolf reached her. He shifted as he came, the way he had not in the marsh. Cleanly. He was a man again before his knees touched the cobbles, and he caught her against his chest as Vesia eased her backward, and he was saying her name over and over the way he had said it across the bond for 4 months. Brindis. 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 And she lifted one hand, the trembling one, and she pressed it against his cheek. "I am all right," she said. It was not exactly true. "Theron, listen to me. The stones know me now. They will not let me fall yet. I have asked them. They have agreed." "You ask them," he said. His voice was breaking. "I am an Aldwin," she said. "Apparently, we ask. Vesia, get the healer, the good one, the old one with the iron braids. Tell her the third pulse is holding the children, but I have torn something inside. I do not know what, and I would like very much not to fall here in the street." Vesia was already moving. The Alpha King of Veilmore lowered his forehead to hers in the smoking dawn, and his shoulders began to shake, and Brindis, who had been a scribe 4 months ago, who had held a quill in a trembling hand and tried to soak up a single drop of ink before it ruined the parchment, closed her eyes and let herself, for the first time in her life, be held. She did not fall in the street. She did not fall in the litter they carried her up the long hill in, either, though the iron-braided healer told her later that it had been a near thing. "A hand's breadth, my lady, no more. The third pulse held you. Whatever your foremothers left curled around your children, it has now also wrapped itself around you. I do not understand it. I am too old to need to understand it. I only thank it." She woke in a chamber she had not seen before. The high arched windows, the hearth tall enough to walk into, the bed wide enough to sleep 5, the Queen's chamber. The chamber she had fled 4 months ago in a gray wool dress and her mother's note in her sleeve. Theron was asleep in a chair beside the bed. He had not undressed. He had not even removed his boots. His head was tipped back against the carved wood, and his hand was wrapped around her hand on the coverlet, and Brindis lay still for a long time and watched him sleep. Really sleep. The slow, heavy sleep of a man who had not slept in 121 nights, the sleep of a wolf whose mate is alive and breathing under his hand. And she did not wake him. She did not need to. Somewhere on the other side of the closed door, she could hear the low voices of the holdfast healer and Vesia, and the still quieter voice of someone she did not know, an old woman with a marsh accent. The grandmother sewed this thread for the daughter who would come back, the seamstress. They had brought her up from creche. They had brought a great many people up from a great many places, in the days she had been asleep, and the kingdom, Vesia would tell her later, in careful pieces, was rearranging itself around her in ways she would spend the rest of her life learning. She turned her head on the pillow. On the small table by the bed, someone had laid out 3 things, very deliberately. Her mother's silver ring on its mended cord. Her mother's folded note, the parchment soft now from being carried. And a third thing she had not seen since the Hall of Iron Treaties, the contract. Someone had brought her the contract. It lay open, her name beside his, in the strange flowing hand the parchment had drawn out of her. The sigils along the margin had stopped glowing. They looked now only like very old ink on very old paper. She lifted her free hand. It was still weak. The iron-braided healer had warned her it would be weak for a long time, and laid it flat on the parchment, and the parchment was warm. Not glowing, just warm, like a hearthstone an hour after the fire has gone out. "It is finished," Theron said quietly. She turned her head. His eyes were open. He had not moved. He had only opened his eyes. "The binding," he said. "It completed itself when you held the cobbles. It does not need anything else from us. Not blood. Not anything else. It is done." "It's done," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I am sorry," he said softly, "that those were the first words I said to you." "They were not bad words," she said. "I have thought about them often." "Have you?" "Yes." She closed her hand around his. "I thought about them in the marsh. When I was sure you would never find me. I thought about them when I delivered other women's children and tried not to think about my own. I thought about them when I put my mother's ring back on every morning, and again when I took it off every night. And I decided, somewhere along the way, that whatever else was true, the man who said it's done across that hall had not been refusing me. He had been recognizing me. And I did not know what to do with that recognition. I am not sure I know yet." His eyes were very full. "Take your time," he said. "I intend to." A small silence. Theron. "Yes." "Maren." His thumb moved against her knuckles. "Just once. There will be a stone for her in the holdfast's garden. I have already given the order. If you wish for one elsewhere, anywhere, my heart, anywhere in the kingdom, you have only to name the place. There will be a road named for her. There will be a hospice in her name. The Healers' College at Vesca will bear her name within the year. I cannot give her back to you. I am sorry. I would if I could. I will give her every other thing I can." Brindis closed her eyes for a moment. "That is good," she said. "That is good. Thank you." "Do not thank me," he said. "Not for that." "All right." Another silence. A longer one. She opened her eyes. Theron. "Yes. The children. Both well. Both strong. The healer says they will come at the proper time, the proper way, and the third pulse is still there. She does not know what to do with it. She says she will not need to. She says it knows what to do with itself, and that we should trust it, because nothing in 900 years has ever wrapped itself around an Aldwin child with that much patience for a reason that was not a reason of love." "A reason of love," Brindis repeated. "That is what she said." She lay still for a while. "All right," she said. "Then I will trust it. I am too tired to argue with a 900-year-old guardian I cannot see." He laughed. It was the first laugh she had ever heard out of him. It was not a king's laugh. It was a tired man's laugh. Surprised by itself, broken at the edges, and Brindis lay in the great bed and listened to it and decided, very privately, that she was going to spend a long time learning to make him do that more often. The twins were born at the very end of summer. A girl first, by the breadth of a single breath, with hair the color of dark wine and a quiet, considering look that the iron-braided healer said was the look of a woman who had already decided several things about the world and was waiting for it to catch up. They named her Maren. a boy second, with his father's storm-amber eyes and a temper that announced itself immediately and at length. They named him Alwyn, after Maren's brother, the real one, the one who had passed 9 years before in his sister's arms, whose name a hunter had stolen and used to undo her. Vesia had wept when they told her. Vesia had wept very rarely in her life, and never in front of her king, and she stood in the chamber with both hands pressed to her mouth, and the iron-braided healer very gently held her elbow until she could breathe again. The third pulse did not go away when the children came out. It settled. The healers stopped being able to hear it after the first week, but Brindis could still feel it some nights, when the babies slept on her chest in the great bed in the high chamber. A soft, slow, patient curl of presence around the small breathing bodies of her daughter and her son. A reason of love. She believed it now. The kingdom rearranged itself. The Lady Serenza was tried before the assembled houses and exiled to the cold islands beyond the northern sea, where she would live out the rest of her life as a fisherwoman's wife in a village that had not heard her family's name in 200 years. The Southern Army was disbanded and reformed under captains the Aldwyn banner had chosen. The chancery was rebuilt. The binding stones beneath the Hall of Iron Treaties were reconsecrated by the 4 marsh mothers who came up from the salt coasts when word reached them. Old women, all of them weeping when they laid their hands on the stones for the first time in 9 generations. And the contract that had begun the whole matter was sealed in glass and laid in the chamber where it had been written, and was no longer used to bind queens. The next king who needed a queen, Theron decreed, would have to find her himself, in a corridor, like a man. He said it with his face perfectly straight in council, and Vesia laughed for the first time anyone could remember, and the lords of Veilmore, half of whom had survived the last 4 months only because Brindis Aldwyn had asked the cobblestones of a burning street to hold a man still, bowed their heads and accepted the decree without argument. Brindis stood sometimes on the high terrace of the palace at evening and looked south toward the salt coasts she could not quite see. Maren's grave was down there, in the holdfast's garden. So were, in time, the carved markers for her mother and her grandmother, and the long line of women who had been silenced in dark places before her, and whose names she now, very slowly, was learning. There was a fountain being built in the lower ward in the shape of a hand cupping water. The mothers of the marshes, the mothers of the mist. She wore the silver ring still. She did not need it anymore. She wore it because her mother had given it to her, and her mother had been worth the giving. Theron found her on the terrace one such evening, with both children asleep against her shoulder, and he did not speak. He came up behind her and laid his chin against the top of her head, and he wrapped his arms around her and the 2 small breathing bodies, and they stood like that for a long time. "Strangers," she said at last quietly. That first night, in the holdfast, I told you we were strangers. I remember. We are not strangers anymore." "No," he said, "we are not." Below them, the city of Veilmore lit its evening lamps, 1 terrace at a time, and the sound of the watch bells came up the long stone slope of the palace, and somewhere down in the marshes that she could not quite see, the salt birds were calling to one another across the dark water the way they had called 4 months ago when she was a stranger to him, and a stranger to herself, and a stranger to the whole long line of women who had been waiting for her to come back. She was not a stranger to any of them now. She closed her eyes against her husband's shoulder, with her children breathing softly against her throat, and she let herself be held. The kingdom held them all. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this story stayed with you.